Okay, we're going to talk about the thyroid and how it relates to time pressure and powerlessness. This is a super common trauma due to like modern culture and clocks and deadlines. Pretty much all of us have this trauma just due to the nature of things. So it's a trauma of running out of time or not moving fast enough. Now, the point of the thyroid, the point of its survival construct is that if you feel like you're running out of time or you can't move fast enough, the thyroid will actually speed up your metabolism and attempt to make you faster, and it speeds you up kind of at the energetic realms. So this is fine for acute situations, but this program is very psychobiologically active. The thyroid's incredibly reactive. It swells up to double its size during the course of a menstrual cycle and during the course of disease, etc. Kind of environmental and consciousness level drivers really affect the thyroid. The parathyroid glands on the side of the neck, similar to the thyroid, but they're involved in regulating calcium balance. And those are involved in the construct of not fast enough to contract a muscle or move a part of the body. And it changes the way that calcium's distributed so your muscles much more easily clinch and much more easily contract. It kind of changes the electrophysiological characteristics. So this trauma is really easy to identify. You basically just simulate a memory or fake memory in your mind and go through the process of running late to an important meeting, or think back to a time you're running really late and just tune into it, relive it, and just see if you feel kind of a knot starting to form in your throat, or if you feel tension there, or pulling, anything like that. The thyroid's also a really energetically important organ. It's kind of a biophotonic antenna. The thyroid is full of this colloid, which is made of huge cross-linked biomolecules with iodine. It's this giant morphing polymer, and it has many enzymes in it. Nobody knows what they're supposed to be doing, but it's clear they're kind of tuning and shifting the polymer depending on what the body needs. This polymer is also full of like really unique biocrystals, unique morphologies, which aren't present anywhere else. And the interesting thing is the thyroid actually has cilia, which are kind of sensory hairs in a way. They transmit information, and they're meant to be like in the stomach, in a lining of the lungs, etc., in places where something passes through. But for some reason, they're in the thyroid, and they seem to be kind of communication systems between the body and this living morphing polymer. So the trauma around kind of powerlessness and danger approaching affects the thyroid, and it seems to remodel the biophotonic aspects of the thyroid so you project more biophotonic energy. You pack way more energetic punch in your words, and this helps you kind of deflect danger and kind of hold your boundaries, but it's quite taxing on the biochemistry. And if this program turns on and off and on and off again, this is how you end up with kind of thyroid autoimmune diseases and a number of other issues. So there's an interesting kind of male-female duality for the thyroid. Most organs, most tissues are the same between men and women, but here there's a duality. For men, the thyroid represents a construct of entering a dangerous situation where you're walking into danger and you need to project your voice and deflect it. But for women, this construct is danger walking into your territory. So I guess this kind of represents some masculine feminine duality of exploration versus creativity and creation. This kind of entering a dangerous situation is really common when people need to walk into a challenging situation. For example, if you know you're going to get fired, but you have to walk in to a room and talk to your boss and HR, and you just know it's going to be dangerous. You know it's not going to go well. This is a kind of a common setup for developing this type of thyroid trauma. I developed this thyroid trauma when I had gotten arrested and I had to go to court, and I had to stand in front of the judge. Just walking to stand in front of the judge caused this trauma construct of entering a dangerous situation. Powerlessness itself tends to stress the thyroid, although it's not clear if there's a dedicated construct for this or if it kind of is represented by the two constructs we just decided. But one of the kind of manifestations of thyroid trauma and powerlessness, metaphorically, is getting choked until surrender. If you've ever been in a situation before where somebody was choking you and you just kind of gave up, this will pretty immediately traumatize the thyroid, and releasing it will bring you kind of a lot of peace. In terms of case studies and blueprints, I'll give you some examples. I developed this trauma when I was quite young, and I was doing competitive swimming, and I really didn't want to go to the competition. I was already having an emotionally charged day. Can't remember why, but then I was swimming in the competition, and I was swimming quite slow, and I knew I was running out of time. And I look up and I see the buzzer in big blocky letters, like counting down, and I just see that it's counting down. I'm going to run out of time. And this conceptual shock of just a giant set of numbers counting down while I'm physically trying to contract my muscles traumatized the thyroid. Another time, when I was much older, I had paid somebody for some consulting work, and they were quite an expert in their field, and I had a Skype meeting set up, and right when it started, everything crashed, and I couldn't get Skype going, and I couldn't contact him, and it was quite expensive consulting, and so because of all the stress, and there was also sleep deprivation involved, I had this trauma of running out of time created my thyroid. Another kind of really common setup for this trauma is people's first day of school. For some reason, this combination of summer running out of time to be a kid, forced to go to school, but also your parents running late or you running late on the first day of school. A number of clients, when we found their core trauma in their thyroid, it was related to this running late to the first day of school. So that's something worth looking at. The affirmation for the thyroid and parathyroids is quite simple. It would be something like, I effortlessly move my body at the correct speed at all times, or I dance ahead of my deadlines, I dance ahead of my challenges, is another quite powerful one. It's very interesting. It seems like you can see the effect of population level thyroid trauma when you look at long COVID. It's a really contentious topic, but there were studies done on COVID fatalities, and they found that certain occupations died way more, significantly more, like 200% more often. And the occupations list was super strange. It was a lot of food packing workers, truck drivers, people who sat in front of computers, security guards. It didn't really make a lot of sense why it was the case, but if you go back through this occupations list, you'll see that every single occupation on that list has time pressure, and more specifically, time pressure to move a food morsel, to move a morsel. This is one of the kind of more granular archetypes of the thyroid. So it's really interesting, and you see it also in the long COVID patient communities. There's been surveys done of how many people with suspected long COVID turned up for assistance in recovery groups. And if you look at March, most severe long haulers came from March 2020. And the surveys indicate there was 10 times more kind of damage in March than any other time, which didn't really make sense in the context of a virus having a lot of time to spread around, et cetera, et cetera. But what is interesting about March is we had this massive population level trauma of running out of time. The media all over the world said 2 weeks to flatten the curve. We have 2 weeks. We're racing the clock. The hospitals are going to get overwhelmed. And I believe this caused running out of time trauma to reactivate or to be developed. And when this trauma construct captured COVID disease energy, is pretty significant because the thyroid is so close to the head, and any traumas around your head will kind of systematically bleed over to consciousness and can affect your biochemistry quite strongly. In terms of some forward-looking ideas, the thyroid seems to be a biophotonic antenna, kind of a light antenna, and the light travels on the carrier waves of our voices. And this is how you can be in a crowded room, crowded cocktail party, yet you can pick out a conversation across the room if you tune into it. It's because you're tuning into the kind of biophotonic energy of it, and you're able to receive kind of this energetic lock-on signature. So it seems like this is how a number of mechanisms work in the body around horizontal gene transfer and viral disease, as we call it. It seems like the thyroid is kind of this open antenna. It's highly tunable. It goes both directions. And in some conditions, and this is an adaptive program to deal with population level trauma and death, if you stumble onto a dead animal or a dead body, you'll smell cadaverin, the smell of death. This is a indole molecule. These molecules are really fishy and smelly, and they're all related. And we have dedicated receptors in our nose called trace amine receptors. They can pick up one drop of this molecule in an ocean of water. All they do is detect these kind of trace amines, which are associated with the smell of death and decay. And it seems like when these receptors activate, it kind of locks on to an energetic target, which would be the dead body or the decomposing animal, and your thyroid biophotonically connects and transfers some information. So this is a way of kind of being adaptive to population level trauma. This process is echoed in the animal world. You see two dogs meet, they'll sniff each other's anuses as a way to get the download on the other dog. And it doesn't really make any sense logically. Like if a dog wanted to smell what the other dog was eating, smell about the other dog's environment, he would smell the mouth. He would smell what's recently went into the mouth, which would be the best insight. But that's not what happens. They smell the anus. And that seems to be, in my perspective, not just a pheromonal thing, etc., but it seems like the dogs are purposely activating their trace amine receptors because the smell of feces activates the same receptors, and it triggers this energetic download of the kind of other dog system. So this is fine, and this is adaptive and helpful, but what if this process triggers accidentally? So I suspect that this does happen quite a bit. For example, if you look at GMO corn, you look at the biochemistry of it, they've done profiles to see what the molecules look like in regular corn and GMO corn, and there's no difference except GMO corn produces 10 times more cadaverin than regular corn. Cadaverin is literally the sense of smell of death molecule. So I suspect that eating a lot of GMO corn, you're actually kind of triggering these trace amine receptors. And by triggering the trace amine receptors, you're creating horizontal genetic transfer, horizontal energetic transfer from the food you're eating. So you'll take on kind of energetic characteristics of this factory farmed food riding on the back of this trace amine lock and load system triggered by cadaverin. This is also one of the reasons why it's so pleasing to put pepper in our food. Because if you look at pepper, it activates these trace amine receptors. The piperine fits in that molecule, and that may be why food seems so dead and bland until you add pepper, and then you just like feel the life force behind it. You feel the energy behind it. It's because you're activating this trace amine receptors and able to energetically connect with it. So this seems to be the actual transfer process behind what we call pathogenic disease. If you look back at history, until kind of Rockefeller medicine and germ theory became the de facto theory, everybody across all cultures considered miasma theory to be the drive of disease, and they believed disease was spread by bad smells. And if you look at older pandemics, you hear the story of thieves' oil. The story is that a group of thieves were robbing graves of Black Death victims, and they were caught, and they realized these guys weren't getting sick. And so the government said, hey, how are you doing this? If you tell us, we'll let you go. And the thieves gave him this composition of a number of really fragrant essential oils, including cinnamon, orange, clove, etc. And by using these in combination, putting them on a rag in front of their face, they were able to avoid disease. And I suspect they did it by jamming the traceamine receptors with so many fragrant molecules in your nose. Your traceamine receptors aren't going to get activated by the cadaverine or rotting smell of anything else around you. This is echoed not just in the kind of thieves' oil mythology, but if you think about old plague doctor masks, they were these long bird nose type masks. And they always stuffed them with garlic and other fragrant herbs. And I believe this was an attempt to block the traceamine receptors. And I believe it probably worked better than the masks that we use today. Everybody looks back at history and says they were just delusional and they had no idea what they're doing, but they were quite practical and quite evidence-based back then. So it's something worth exploring, this miasma theory, this traceamine receptor lock and load theory. It has strong ramifications for our culture and way of life. And the point is basically you want to keep negative smells out of your space, particularly the smell of rotting, the smell of cadaver, and the smell of death. These things will trigger bioenergetic systems inside of you that make you think there's death around. And this process is also echoed by eating lots of GMO corn. It seems to like it may also trigger this process. So something to keep an eye out for.